Thank you very much. So that urgency we've been talking about all day, you say it can be done quickly, but industry needs to be involved. Just a thought in terms of those international negotiations, whether it be TTIP, whether it be Japan, Mercosur, all mentioned. How important are those, do you think, John? And how do we make sure, what for you are the areas these sorts of negotiations should focus on most? What is the most important thing to unlock if we're really going to push this agenda now?
Well, going back to my own perspective, tariff barriers still are critical. So the India example would be very important for us. If you take the spirits industry in Europe, particularly Scotch whiskey in Scotland and cognac, the value of those exports is 10% of the total agricultural exports, food and drink exports of Europe. Quite an astounding number and very high value. So when you go to Beijing now, where we opened a Johnny Walker House last year, the average spend by a customer on a bottle of whiskey in those outlets is 1,500 pounds. So we have, it's not just the quantity that we're exporting in Europe, it's the value of the goods we're producing is very high. So I know there's many non-tariff barriers that affect a wide variety of industries, but certainly in the food and drink industry for us, and for an agriculturally focused country like Ireland, tariff barriers still need to be front and center in terms of reducing those as much as possible.
And for you, Jose Vicente, what are the most important issues to focus on to realize all this potential?
I repeat, this is not an option. We need to do that,
Yep.
but I think we are talking today about the industry, and the industry in general is an activity with high added value. Then this is one of the strongest of Europe, the activity of the high added value. And we have a big problem in Europe, especially in some countries, like in my country, with the unemployment. Industry is not only a source of jobs, not only in terms of quantity, mainly in terms of quality. And we extend our markets, we have more possibilities to create jobs, quality jobs, who gives opportunity, especially our young people, which now they have a rate of unemployment, which is really a big danger for the future, in case of my country, but I think for the future of all Europe.
Okay. I know you have to leave us in a minute, and I promised I would let you go on time so you don't miss your plane. But could I just ask you, I've done this all throughout the day, trying to identify messages for policymakers, key priorities, the things we need to do. If everything is urgent, what is the most urgent? And if you had to identify one priority in the trade policy area to make sure that trade policy, as we said, the link between industrial policy, trade policy, really contributes to the industrial renaissance, what would it be for you?
Without any discussion, this is part of this industrial work. I think today, I repeat, probably there are no any industry in Europe who is not thinking in exports, but also in investing outside Europe. Maybe the big change is we think in import, in exports. Probably my colleague from Ireland, when they sell whiskey to Spain, and we think in terms of export when we send a good wine to Ireland. But I think we need to start thinking this is not a sport.
Okay.
We need, sport is outside the European Union.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Gonzalez does have to leave us, so will you join me in thanking him very much? Thank you so much, sir. I just want to follow up on a couple of things with our panel, and then I will come out to all of you. But Pierre-Alain, just picking up on that question about the link between trade and industrial policy, mentioned earlier also by the Commissioner. Do you think that the link is made effectively enough? Now, we've been talking about joined-up thinking all day. Is there enough joined-up thinking on this issue, or do the two sides need to really work more effectively together? I'm thinking in terms of issues like resource diplomacy, as well as the broad trade issues. Is there enough joined-up thinking between the two?
Well, I think we are all aware that the number one issue for Europe today is competitiveness. And that's related with my first remark, where I say the population, people, are now waiting something else from Europe than just, again, cost cutting reducing of deficits and so on. So it's all about competitiveness. And I'm absolutely convinced, I've worked all my life in Japan, in Brazil, in France. I know when you open, when you exchange, when you compare with another country, it's immediately about being the best, about benchmark, about what you do better, about specialization. And so I'm absolutely convinced that developing trade, making those large agreements is absolutely key to improve, and it's essential, European competitiveness. Now, I don't have to say that to our commissioner, but there are plenty of risk, and we as industrialists, we look at very specific risk. One of them is the exchange rate. And so we need to be extremely careful that our partner in those agreements is not playing games or giving himself some advantage through exchange rate. It's a point we need to be very careful.
I just ask one other question, which is we talk a lot about small and medium-sized enterprises, their importance to the economy of Europe. We've talked about industry being the backbone. To what degree, Peter, could I perhaps ask you, I mean, when we look at TTIP, the big headlines, we heard you talked about the big American firms that are also European firms. To what extent do you think TTIP will actually also help with the internationalization of smaller businesses? Does it have something for the smaller companies, or is this something really on the much bigger playing field, and it's the job more internally for the EU and the US to help their small businesses take advantage of whatever work is done? And then I'm coming out to all of you.
I am convinced that TTIP will make, that the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Agreement will make a tremendous difference for European small business. And the reason for that is that right now it's very difficult for a small business to deal with a market where they don't know what the regulatory environment is. They only know that it's different. If we do this agreement correctly, if we address many of the differences between our regulatory regimes, both of which are aimed at protecting our consumers and our environment, if we find ways to bridge between them so that the smaller European firms know that they can export to the United States without worrying about it, without worrying whether or not their products meet the regulatory requirements, that opens a whole new avenue for them. And I think that that will make a difference. I think it will also make a difference in things that this agreement done properly will essentially have our regulators cooperating with one another so that, for instance, if there are small food producers here, rather than having to be certified by the Food and Drug Administration as having good manufacturing practices, if FDA simply accepts a certification by a European authority, all of a sudden, people who would never have a chance of entering a market may be able to. This could be significant, hugely significant.
Come back on that, I hope, with our other panelists, but let me come down and see if there are any questions or comments from any of you. Yes, please, sir.